a scale of 1 to 10, how strong is your faith? If you were to rank your faith today, would you give yourself a 10? Would you give yourself a 6? Would it be a 2? Would it be a 1? Would it be a 0? On a scale of 1 to 10, how strong is your faith? You know, Jesus, as you read through the Gospel of Matthew, he talks about those of little faith, and he talks about those of great faith. You remember at times he would say to the disciples, "O ye of little faith." And then there was a Gentile on one occasion. He said, "How great is your faith? I haven't found faith like this anywhere among the people of God." So let me ask you today, do you have little faith or do you have great faith? How would you rank your faith on a scale of 1 to 10? And let me just say, no matter where you rank your faith, God is able to elevate that faith. But let me tell you, you got to work your faith. It's just like your muscles. If you don't work your muscles, they're not going to strengthen. You're going to go backwards. And your faith, you have to work your faith muscles. You have to step out in faith. There are times when you just got to step out in faith, trust God, believe in God. And I want to tell you, God always comes through. Now, you might be out here today and you might say, well, what is faith? Well, faith is trusting in the character of God and the promises of God. That's faith. If I can just break it down in a very simple manner, faith is trusting in the character of God, trusting in the promises of God. That's what faith is. It's not about having faith in me. It's not about having faith in the church. It's not about having faith in yourself. It's about having faith in God. Faith in the character of God, that you know who God is, that you know the character of God, you know the attributes of God, you know the dependability of God, and you trust in God. Whether you understand Him or not, you trust in Him. And then you trust in the promises of God. Aren't you glad that the Bible is filled with so many promises? I mean, is there an occasion in your life where you cannot find a promise of God to meet that particular need? Faith is trusting in the character of God and also in the promises of God. Now, we often talk about mountain-moving faith. I want to talk today about river-parting faith, because we're going to go back in the Old Testament. We're going to go to the book of Joshua, and we're going to be reminded of that story when Joshua and the leaders led the people of God as they crossed the Jordan River on dry ground. They didn't build a bridge. They didn't take a boat. God parted the river. And it was a miracle of God. And you know, you have these two partings of bodies of water in the Old Testament. God parted the Red Sea. You know, we talked last week about Moses. God parted the Red Sea so that the people of God could leave Egypt. And then He parted the Jordan River that they could enter into the Promised Land. And when the Red Sea was parted, God elevated Moses so that they knew he was the leader of God's people. And when He parted the Jordan River, God elevated a new leader, Joshua, so that they knew that he had God's anointing upon him. So if you have your Bible, go ahead and take it and turn over to Joshua chapter 3. And I want to begin reading with verse 1. We're talking today about river parting faith. Joshua started early the next morning and left the acacia grove with all the Israelites. They went as far as the Jordan and stayed there before crossing. After 3 days, the officers went through the camp and commanded the people, "When you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God carried by the Levitical priest, you are to break camp and follow it. But keep a distance of about 1,000 yards." By the way, that's about a half a mile. "But keep a distance of about 1,000 yards between yourselves and the ark. Don't go near it, so that you can see the way to go, for you haven't traveled this way before." Now, some think you're to keep a distance because of the holiness of the ark, and maybe so, but you had this vast amount of people, and the ark had to be up there enough distance where the people could see where to go and where to follow. Verse 5, Joshua told the people, "Consecrate yourselves," or we could translate this, Sanctify yourselves, because the Lord will do wonders among you tomorrow. Think about the anticipation that they had thinking about the next day. Then he said to the priest, carry the ark of the covenant and go on ahead of the people. So they carried the ark of the covenant and went ahead of them. The Lord spoke to Joshua, today I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel, so they will know that I will be with you just as I was with Moses. Command the priest carrying the ark of the covenant, when you reach the edge of the water, stand in the Jordan. Then Joshua told the Israelites, come closer and listen to the words of the Lord your God. He said, you will know that the living God is among you, and that he will certainly dispossess before you the Canaanites, Hittites, Hivites, Perizzites, Girgashites, Amorites, and Jebusites, when the ark of the covenant of the Lord of the whole earth goes ahead of you into the Jordan. Now choose 12 men from the tribes of Israel, 1 man for each tribe. When the feet of the priest who carry the ark of the Lord, and here again, he's called the Lord of the whole earth, come to rest in the Jordan's water, its water will be cut off. The water flowing downstream will stand up in a mass. When the people broke camp to cross the Jordan, the priest carried the ark of the covenant ahead of the people. Now the Jordan overflows its banks throughout the harvest season. But as soon as the priests carrying the ark reached the Jordan, their feet touched the water at its edge, and the water flowing downstream stood still. Rising up in a mass that extended as far as Adam, a city next to Zerathon, the water flowing downstream into the sea of the Arabah, the Dead Sea, was completely cut off, and the people crossed opposite Jericho. The priest carrying the ark of the Lord's covenant stood firmly on dry ground in the middle of the Jordan, while all Israel crossed on dry ground until the entire nation had finished the crossing of the Jordan. Now let's go on into chapter 4. There weren't originally chapter divisions in the Bible. It says in verse 1, after the entire nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord spoke to Joshua, choose 12 men from the people, 1 man for each tribe, and command them, take 12 stones from this place in the middle of the Jordan where the priests are standing, carry them with you, and set them down at the place where you spend the night. So Joshua summoned the 12 men he had selected from the Israelites, 1 man for each tribe, and said to them, go across to the ark of the Lord your God in the middle of the Jordan. Each of you lift a stone onto his shoulder, 1 for each of the Israelite tribes, so that this will be a sign among you. In the future, now notice this, in the future, when your children ask you, what do these stones mean to you? You should tell them, the water of the Jordan was cut off in front of the ark of the Lord's covenant. When it crossed the Jordan's water was cut off. Therefore, these stones will always be a memorial for the Israelites. I want to talk today not about mountain moving faith, but about river parting faith. And as I go through this message today, I want you to think about a river in your life that seems uncrossable. It's a river that you've come up to. There's no bridge to be built. There's no canoe or boat to take. And you feel like you've come to an impasse and you cannot get across. I want to tell you, God can part the river. God can part the river, and you can go across on dry ground. I want to talk today about faith. We know how important faith is. You can't even be a Christian without faith. But it's one thing to have saving faith. It's another thing to have living faith. And some people have enough faith to be saved, but they don't have enough faith to live each and every day trusting in God, believing in God, trusting in the character of God, trusting in the promises of God. And so I want to talk today about faith and what we learn about faith from this particular story in the Old Testament. One of the things I believe we learn is this: faith begins with the religious leaders. Faith begins with the leaders of God's people. They are to set the pace when it comes to faith. Did you notice in verse 6 of chapter 3? Joshua says, he says this to the priest: carry the ark of the covenant and go on ahead of the people. So they, the priest, carried the ark of the covenant and went ahead of them. Who were to lead the people? The priest, the Levitical priest. And the priest were the spiritual leaders among God's people. And Joshua said to these priests, you're to carry the ark of the covenant, and the ark is basically a sacred box that contained the 10 commandments. And that box symbolized the presence of God. And the priests were the only ones that were allowed by God to carry the ark of the covenant. And Joshua said, I want you to carry that ark of the covenant. I want you to go out in front of the people. Go out about a half a mile in front of the people. Now, don't go too far where they lose you, but go far enough in front so everybody can see. And you are to lead the way. I want to say to us as pastors, and not just to the pastors, the staff pastors in this church, but there are other spiritual leaders among us today, lay people. I want to say to you and to myself, we must lead the way in terms of faith. You remember what it says in 1 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 12? Paul was writing to Timothy, a young pastor. He said, don't let anyone despise your youth, but set an example for the believers in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, and in purity. He said, Timothy, you must be an example of trusting in the character of God, of trusting in the promises of God. People are going to look at you. Do you have faith? You see, we're to lead the way and to show people what faith in God is all about. If leaders don't have faith, then the people won't have faith in the leaders. We have to have faith. I'm not saying you have to have perfect faith, but you do have to have growing faith. And you have to have faith that really trusts God and believes in God. Now, by the way, when you think about the priests that were leading the way and they were carrying the ark of the covenant, again, the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God was the symbol of the presence of God. And by them carrying that ark, what was that also saying to the people? Your real leader is God. It's not really the priest that are leading you. And sometimes you might look at me or look at the other pastoral staff and say, those are our leaders. And yes, we are human leaders that God has appointed here, but who's the real leader of this church? Who's the real leader of God's people? You know, we're called pastors, which is just the word for shepherd. And yet in the Bible it says Jesus is the chief shepherd. It says Jesus is the great shepherd. Now, I'm a shepherd, but I'm not the chief shepherd. And I'm not the great shepherd. Jesus is that. And I love how this Ark of the Covenant, they carried it. And yes, the spiritual leaders, they led the way in faith. But by carrying the Ark of the Covenant, what were they saying? God is the one who is leading us. And even when Joshua says, hey, when people ask you, what do these stones mean? In chapter 4, verse 7, he said, this is the answer you're to give them. The water of the Jordan was cut off in front of the ark of the Lord's covenant. When it, not when you, when it crossed the Jordan's water was cut off. It's the Ark of the Covenant. Now, we don't know where this ark is. When the Babylonian Empire came in and defeated Judah, that ark was lost forevermore. And some people try to find it. Maybe you've seen Raiders of the Lost Ark, and maybe people are trying to find it out there, but we don't know where it is. And we don't need to know where it is because we don't need the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord anymore because God's presence is in us and among us, not in a box, but through the power of the Holy Spirit. And Jesus is that great shepherd. Jesus is that chief shepherd, and we are to lead the way in faith. You know, I shared recently with the staff and also with the trustees that I had felt convicted in my life recently. Convicted in my life as a leader and convicted in the area of faith. You know, in March of 2020, we were hit by COVID. Not just this church, not just this city, not just this nation, but really the entire world. And right before COVID, man, we were hitting on all cylinders and had a great baptismal service, and attendance was strong, and we were on the upcline, and then COVID hit. And I'll tell you what, it's been a challenging couple of years. And those of you who have come in new, you don't maybe realize the challenges that we have been through. Our secretary died of COVID. Her husband died of COVID. We had about 15 church members that died of COVID, had many more died during COVID. We still have people who haven't come back because they're concerned about COVID. We had some people that left and went to other churches during COVID. I mean, our church has been hit during the COVID season. And I have been guilty in my mind of comparing the church now to pre-COVID. And look around and, well, that person isn't here, or that person isn't here, or not the same amount of people. And that's been in my mind. And so often I will compare the church now to pre-COVID. And recently the Lord, not in an audible voice, personally, I've never heard God speak in an audible voice. Maybe you have, but I haven't. But you know, God knows how to let you know that He's talking to you. And I felt like God said, Mark, enough is enough. That church, that pre-COVID church is gone. It's gone. You're never getting Carol Green back. You're never getting Stett back. You're never getting Wayne Fletcher back. You're never getting these folks back. The church will never be the way it was pre-COVID. Now, I hope that it'll be greater in the future. I hope it'll be stronger in the future. But we are in a rebuilding process. Now, we can mope around and we can complain and we can be discouraged and we can continue to think about the church pre-COVID and compare it, or we can say, this is the church that we are now. And let's love each other and let's be committed to this church and let's reach out to people and let's grow and grow and grow. God's given us a baptismal service a month or so ago. We got another one coming up. God is saving people. Stop. This is what the Lord was saying to me. Maybe He's saying it to you as well. The Lord said, stop comparing the now church with the pre-COVID church and just love these people and pastor these people and believe that I can part the river. Faith begins with the religious leaders. We got to have faith. Board of Trustee members, you got to have faith. If you're a small group leader, you got to have faith. And faith is trusting in the character of God and the promises of God. Well, second, faith involves risk. It always does. Faith involves risk. I hope you read this story carefully, but let me just read again verse 13 from chapter 3. It says, when the feet of the priest who carry the ark of the Lord of the whole earth, when their feet come to rest in the Jordan's water, its water will be cut off. The water flowing downstream will stand up in a mass. So did you get the picture? It wasn't that they came up to the edge and the river parted and everything was fine and then they stepped out. That's not how the story reads. The river's flowing. It's harvest time. It's overflowing. And God said through Joshua, when you step into the river, that's when it's going to part. Now, some of you know that I like to fish a little bit. And I don't mind fishing lakes and ponds, but I'll tell you what I really like fishing is the rivers. I love fishing the rivers and the creeks. I like to kayak. I like to wade, stand on the bank. And every now and then, that good spot's on the other side of the river. And you got to walk across. Greg, I remember that night we walked across the river and I about lost you. And I thought, Glory's going to kill me if I lose you. And sometimes I'm walking across about, this high, and sometimes I wonder, is that faith or foolishness? But the rivers around here, it's not like the Ohio River. It's not like the Mississippi River. But, as you know who live here, when it rains a lot, the Great Miami can get wide and deep and fast. And I will tell you, I don't cross the river when it's like that. But you think about a river. When it's flowing, it's high, it's fast, it's deep. You don't want to get near that. You can be swept away. I mean, you can die. Even in the Great Miami around here, it's not a mighty river like the Mississippi River, but people have died in the Great Miami River. And the priest, again, back to us leaders, people are standing back. They're waiting to see what happens. When your feet step into the water, it will part. Faith involves risk. You say, what risk? Well, the risk of getting hurt. But what about the risk of looking like a fool? What if you step in that water and nothing happens? Whoa, wait a second. There went one of the priests. Well, we got to get a new priest because we just lost one. I mean, you would look like a fool. And sometimes as a leader, as a pastor, trustees, whatever it is, sometimes you want to go in a direction. You feel like God's leading you in a direction. And listen, you're stepping out in faith, and if God doesn't come through, you look like a fool. Faith involves risk. And faith requires an obedient step of faith. Have you ever stepped out in faith and God came through? I know you have. I want to encourage you to do it more and more. Let me remind you of a couple of stories from the Gospels in the ministry of Jesus. In Matthew chapter 12, verse 13, it says, on the Sabbath, there was a man with a shriveled hand. His hand was paralyzed. His hand was shriveled in some way. And Jesus was going to heal this man. And it says in Matthew 12:13, then he said to the man, stretch out your hand. And the guy's like, well, wait a second. I can't, Jesus. I have a shriveled hand. Stretch out your hand. So he stretched it out, and it was completely restored, just as sound as the other. That was an obedient step of faith. That was Jesus speaking the word in obedience. I'm going to open this hand. And he did, because Jesus said, do it. Or what about Luke 17:14? You remember the 10 lepers? They said, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. And in verse 14 of chapter 17 in the Gospel of Luke, it says, when he saw them, he said, go show yourselves to the priest, because that's the kind of local health inspector. And they had to go in order to, be okay, approved to go back among the people of God. They still had leprosy. When Jesus said, go show yourselves to the priest, they still had leprosy. And they're thinking, well, he's going to reject us if we go. But look what it says. And as they went, they were cleansed. Not before. And as they went, they were cleansed. Here they are, full of leprosy, secluded from the people of God, in quarantine. And Jesus said, go show yourselves to the priest. They're thinking, well, we're not whole. He's just going to say, get back in your leper colony. As they went, man, they were healed. And by the way, only one came back to thank the Lord, the Samaritan. What do you have to risk in obeying God in faith? Maybe it's your reputation. Maybe it's your job. Maybe it's a friendship, a comfortable lifestyle. Maybe it's your life. Maybe that's the risk. Martin Luther once said, this is a famous quote, Faith is a living, daring confidence in God's grace, so sure and certain that a man would stake his life on it 1,000 times. Listen, that's great faith. Do you have little faith or do you have great faith? Well, one other thing let me share today about faith. Faith should be remembered. Remember what God has done. So God parted the Jordan River. They walked across on dry ground. The river didn't part until the priest stepped in. Ark of the Covenant leading the way, showing it's God that's parting this sea. It's God that's leading you. And then when everybody got on dry ground, Joshua chose 12 men, one from each tribe, said, go get 12 stones out of that river. And they put it on the other side of the bank. And if you read on in Joshua 4, it says those stones are still there to this day. And Joshua said, when your children come up to you and say, what do these stones mean? That's when you tell them the story. Listen, we need some stones in our life. We need to remember what God has done. And by the way, that shows God doesn't do a miracle of that magnitude every day, right? Because he said, put the stones there to remember this day and to tell the people what I have done. Do you have any stones that you've erected? Psalm 103 verses 1 through 5 says, bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me. Bless his holy name. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits, who forgives all your iniquity, who heals all your diseases, who redeems your life from the pit, who crowns you with steadfast love and mercy, who satisfies you with good, so that your youth is renewed like the eagles. Forget not all his benefits. Forget not what God has done in your life. You say, well, how do I remember? It could be a song, right? Maybe there's a song in your life that reminds you. You were going through a season in your life, and there was a song you were listening to, or a song. You know, the Bible talks about God can give you a song in the night. And when you hear that song, God reminds you, remember what I did in your life? Do you remember how I healed your body? Do you remember how I put your marriage back together? It could be a song that causes you to remember. It could be a Bible verse, a verse that God gave you, a passage that a pastor was preaching on, a Bible verse, a Bible passage that jogs your memory and awakens you from your slumber and reminds you, I am the living God, and what I did for you back then, I can do for you today. It could be a place. Maybe at Camp Lebanon, as a child, you were converted to Christ. Maybe at Camp Lebanon during the camp meeting, you were converted to Christ. And when you go back on those grounds, you remember, wow, God did a work in my life here. Maybe it's coming back into this sanctuary. You know, next week I'm going to be down in Camargo, Kentucky. It's a metropolis, my friend. And that's where I grew up. That's where I went to church. And they've asked me to come back and do part of the camp meeting. So next Sunday night through Wednesday night, I'll be back in the same sanctuary where on September 23rd, 1990, I gave my life to Jesus Christ. And I can't help but think about that when I walk into that sanctuary. Maybe it's a place. Maybe it's a picture. Maybe it's through journaling. Forget not all his benefits. Dale Davis says, the greatest enemy of faith may be forgetfulness. Maybe that's the enemy. You've forgotten who God is. You've forgotten what God has done. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. God hasn't changed. We've changed, but God hasn't changed. You know, one of the ways I remember, I mentioned the date just a second ago, but every year I celebrate my spiritual birthday. And do you know, if I'm not mistaken, September 23rd was also Wayne Fletcher's physical birthday. So he was celebrating his physical birthday, and I was celebrating my spiritual birthday. And every year, I would celebrate my birthday. Still do. It does give me an opportunity to go out someplace to get a nice lunch, to celebrate I get to celebrate 2 birthdays. Just kidding. But I think back about how the Lord saved me. And on that day, I had been into drugs and alcohol and all that lifestyle. It had a hold on my life. It can get a hold of you. Drugs can get a hold of you. I want to tell you, prescription drugs can get a hold of you if you're not careful. Drugs can get a hold of you. Alcohol can get a hold of you. Gambling can get a hold of you. There's a lot of addictions that can get a hold of you. And people say, well, just quit. It's not that easy. There's a time when you can quit. You all know this about addiction, right? So when you start using, drinking, smoking, whatever it is, you finally cross a line where you can't quit anymore on your own. Maybe early on you can put it aside. You walk over a line until you've given up your freedom. It's in control. And I had went to rehab and counseling, all this stuff. I still wasn't free. And in my mind, I kept thinking, because I would still go to church. My mom made me go to church. I would think every now and then, if you just went forward to that altar, knelt down and prayed, everything would be better. And I remember one night laughing, that's not the answer. That's not going to fix me. But God was dealing with me and convicting me. And on September 23rd, 1990, I went forward on the 3rd verse. Wasn't going to go on the first. I had planned on going on the 2nd. And when the 2nd one went by, I said, I'm definitely going on the 3rd. And I gave my life to Christ. And I wonder if some of those people thought, will he last? You ever had that happen? Now, let's be honest. Somebody gets saved and we wonder, I wonder if this will last. Well, I want you to know it's been a lot of years since September 23rd, 1990, and I'm still following Jesus. I haven't used alcohol, drugs. God has set me free. And I love that passage of Scripture. I forget which passage it is, but Jesus said to a man, he was possessed by a demon. He said, leave and never enter again. God can give you a lasting freedom through Jesus Christ. But after I was saved, I'd have people come up to me and say, I'm so proud of you. Man, what an accomplishment. I'd be like, why are you proud of me? I didn't do anything. All I did is knelt down and asked Jesus to set me free. And there's a verse, Psalm 115, verse 1 says, not to us, O Lord, not to us, but to your name be the glory because of your love and faithfulness. God gets all the glory. Don't forget what God has done for you in the past. He's just the same today. So we've talked about faith. We've talked about river parting faith. So let me ask you, what river do you need parted today? What's the river? You've come to the edge. You can't get across. You know what it is. What's the river? What's the insurmountable challenge that you're facing? Maybe individually or maybe as a family. Are you praying for a loved one or a friend that has rejected Christ, that needs to be saved? And at times when you're praying, you're thinking, man, I don't think they'll ever get saved. You need to reject those doubts. You need river-parting faith to believe with God all things are possible. Do you have a health issue? You went to the doctors, they don't know what to do, and you want to go now to the great physician who can heal all manner of sickness and disease? Is there a relationship that needs reconciled? There's been a breakdown in a relationship. There's an impasse in this relationship, and it needs healed. God can heal relationships. He can bring reconciliation. Do you need help from God financially? What's the river? You've come to the river. There's an impasse. You need river parting faith. But remember, they had to step into the water before it parted. I'm going to challenge you to believe before the answer comes. Be like those lepers. They still had leprosy all in their body. And they're thinking, what are we doing? We're going to the priest as they went. They were cleansed. Not before, as they went. River parting faith. Why don't you step out today and believe? Maybe for you it's coming down to this altar. Maybe you're not a person that comes to the altar much. And it's not that if you never come to the altar, you're not a good Christian. I don't mean that at all. But maybe you stepping out today is saying, I'm going to come and kneel before God. I'm going to bring this problem. I'm going to bring this hurt. I'm going to bring this relationship. Or maybe you're not a Christian. And maybe you've been thinking about following Christ. Maybe even people here think you're a Christian. But you know in your heart you're not following Jesus. And God is saying to you, come forward. When I was sitting out in that pew that day, I wondered, is this really going to fix my problem? Is this really going to help me? But I had to step out. And, as I stepped out, it was like the Lord carried me the rest of the way. And he saved me. And I want you to know he can save you. We're having a baptismal service. You want to get ready for it? We're having the baptismal service August 7th. You can get ready today. Because if you aren't saved, baptism won't do you any good. But if you're saved, it's a powerful witness of your conversion. What river are you at? God's the same God. He can part that river. But you have to step in by faith.
Thank you for joining us today for Towne Church Online. We pray you've been blessed, encouraged, and even challenged by today's message. If you would like to respond in any way, maybe you'd like to give your heart to Jesus, maybe you have a prayer request you'd like to share, or you'd like to just check in and let us know how you're doing, you can go to our website at towne.church/connect and fill out our online Connect card there. Also, if you'd like to give to Towne Church to support the continuing ministry here in our area and beyond, go to our website at towne.church/invest and you can give of your tithes and offerings there. Make sure to like, subscribe, or to follow so you can get these messages each time they come on. You can find the links there in the description of this video. Until we're able to see each other again, we pray you be blessed.